but it was a very conscious decision. Go long, see if events play into our hands. They didn't, and therefore we ended up on the fringes of the points.
Hello and welcome to this Akkodis Race Debrief. My name's Jodi, and joining us today we have team representative Bradley Lord answering your questions from the Monaco Grand Prix. Bradley, you're fresh off the back of being in Monaco. A frustrating one, it brings its own challenges each year, but how would you summarise the race?
It was long. I think the only positive is we got both cars to the finish. George was obviously able to make up a few positions thanks to the strategy that we followed and the decision to try and go very long and hope that events fell into our hands. But it was clear really from the point at which we qualified 14th and 15th on Saturday that even getting into the top 10 was going to be a stretch, just because the nature of Monaco, you can't even really use strategy to offset yourself or undercut other cars or make gains. So yeah, that was the biggest challenge of the weekend, and it just made for a very long and pretty processional race.
Yeah, and talking about qualifying, where it is so key at Monaco, what happened to George's car in Quali, and are we confident that we've solved it to go into Barcelona?
Yeah, so George, we'd made a lot of setup changes going into qualifying, having struggled a bit in the 3 practice sessions. George reported the car feeling much better and much more alive under him. So he was optimistic of fighting for the front 2 rows in qualifying, then got into his first run in Q2. Through the first corner, he'd already found a 1/10 of a second running on that medium tyre. So again, the performance indication was good. And then suddenly he lost power. He came on the radio, said, "Got no power, got no drive." It transpires that what has happened is that a wiring loom has short-circuited, and that has cost ignition power to the combustion engine. So George, for the next part of the lap, was able to motor on the electric motor, so the MG UK, and draining down the energy that was in the battery, but then that also ran out sort of in the tunnel. So ultimately an electrical problem, a short circuit in a wiring loom that led to a failure of the ignition electrics on the engine. In terms of resolving that, we've been able to identify what's happened. We'll be able to counter check all of the other PUs that are in the pool to make sure that there isn't any imminent danger of a repeat, apply any fixes that are required there and any preventative measures, and then ensure that in the build processes going forward that particular point, which is something we haven't seen before on this PU, is countermeasured and prevented.
So now let's talk about the big question that was on everyone's lips on Sunday. Why did we not split our strategy?
Yeah, it was interesting seeing the reaction after the race, because I think there was a belief perhaps that being able to do 2 stops somehow opened up some more strategic options. And in some way it did. It opened up the opportunity to work as a team and to control track position in order to buy pit stop gaps for the first of the cars and potentially the other car as well if you were able to invert your drivers. So we went into the race looking really not at how could we make a few positions up, but what gave us the best chance of getting into the points. And we knew events would have to fall our way for that to happen. So there were 2 options. There was stop very early, as we saw Tsunoda do, for example, in the Red Bull. He started P11, took a lap 1 stop, and then ran very, very long. Or there was wait and see how events unfold, hope for either red flags or safety car periods that would provide opportunities for free stops and effectively to gain positions in the order. However, we knew all the way through that we were at the mercy of teams playing team strategy. And once that happened, there was nothing you could do about it. You could stop out of that strategic game and then you just catch the pack up and you're behind all the cars behind you, or you wait for it to play out and see if the opportunity comes to you. Now, we saw Racing Bulls play that game very effectively first of all, and then Williams do the same, including inverting their drivers in order to make sure both could cycle through and make it into the top 10. Subsequently, we had to go at the same. We ran out of laps to do it for both drivers, which is why Kimi ended up P18, but George obviously climbed positions to P11. And if we look at Tsunoda, he took that lap 1 stop, but then had to stop very late and himself ended up P17. So unfortunately, the strategy didn't offer us an opportunity to do anything else. It was clear that working as a team was going to be a priority in the race if the opportunity came. We talked about that with both drivers in the morning strategy meeting. Both were on board with doing it. So it was really our only chance of rolling the dice and seeing if events came towards us, and they didn't. So it may have looked like, as Toto, I think, joked after the race, we'd forgotten about the two-stop rule or something else, but it was a very conscious decision. Go long, see if events play into our hands. They didn't, and therefore we ended up on the fringes of the points. But even doing what we did, George made up 3 positions rather than losing them. So there was that. But really the difference between a P11 finish and a P20 finish is still 0 points. So it made no odds whatsoever. Splitting strategies, stopping earlier, it might have helped us consolidate P14 or P12 or P13, but really that makes no odds in the championship picture.
And let's talk about that mandatory 2-stop pit stop. I, for one, was full of hope that it would make a big difference for the race. But we've had Toto mention if it is going to continue to go forward, then it needs to be tweaked, that rule. So do you have any ideas of how that could be tweaked going forward?
Yeah, I think the intent was a good one. We saw last year in Monaco that a lap 1 red flag meant everyone could change tyres and then simply ran in a procession to the flag. We know that overtaking is very difficult in Monaco, particularly with this generation of car, because they're bigger, longer, wider, heavier than previous sort of forms of Formula One cars have been as well. So the intent was, how can we make the show better? How can we introduce more variability and more variety? I think we've tried something that hasn't hugely managed to do that. I mean, we saw more action in the pits. We saw controlled but nonetheless competitive race up front for the win and for the podium positions as well. What we can do to change it, ultimately, the challenge that you're facing is that it's nearly impossible to overtake in Monaco. So one thing that will come towards us next year are slightly smaller, slightly lighter cars that may make it just create more relative space for overtaking in Monaco, which will be one of the circuits that is quite energy rich. And so we'll see high levels of performance, but also smaller, more agile cars that may well help us to achieve that. The other one realistically is looking at what is possible in terms of track changes and track layout changes, which obviously in a place like Monaco where space is anyway at a premium, not an easy thing to do, but certainly something worth looking at.
And you've touched upon the team play that the different teams are doing. We did actually see on the internet, there's been some footage going around how we see Toto pointing down to James Vowles, and you are there, you're in the mix. So can you tell us, is this a new beef that we need to be aware of throughout the season?
I was messaging Toto yesterday saying it would be really brilliant if it were a real argument, and I just can't imagine him and James actually having that happen. I've seen some stuff on the internet as well comparing it to sort of Toto's reaction in Saudi in 2021. It looks superficially similar. I was standing there next to that one as well, and I can certainly confirm it was nothing like that at all. And it was simply oh, thanks very much for, thanks for the team play, and there was nothing else we could do. And I think as Toto explained afterwards, James had already messaged to say, sorry, we had to play the team game. And he's absolutely right. They did. It gave them 2 points finishes, and it's exactly the sort of thing we'd have been contemplating doing had we been in the position to make it work for both drivers. And indeed, it is exactly what we did with George and Kimi, to give George that P11 rather than P17 or P18 as Kimi ended up finishing.
We were expecting to see Toto being taken out by James Vowles for a dinner like Albon did to George. So
I think that might be planned in Barcelona.
Nice.
Anyway.
Okay, good. All is right with the world. Going forward then, looking at the team morale now, we've had a couple of frustrating races in this triple header coming from Imola, now Monaco. How are the garage feeling, as I know they would have flown straight out to Barcelona now?
It's been a tough 2 weeks. I mean, it's true, if you spend any amount of time in Formula One, you know that you spend a lot more time in the sport losing than you do winning. There's only one team that wins any race weekend, and that's part of the nature of the sport. So you have to be resilient to be part of a Formula One team, but it's been 2 tough weekends, and 2 tough weekends on the road. Monaco brings with it a whole load of additional challenges in terms of restrictions on working space, complicated logistics. It's a tough weekend and a demanding one. The team, as you say, have travelled straight on to Barcelona. I think morale is good because we are a resilient team. We know that the only way out of a difficult period or difficult races is to stick to doing what we do, stick to our operating procedures, and then make the right decisions that enable us to put the car back in a happier place, and therefore for the drivers to make the most of that to start moving forward again and building a bit more forward momentum. But certainly it's been a tough 2 weeks that have kind of cost us the good momentum we had in that first quarter of the season, and it's now on everybody in the team to play their part in turning it around in Barcelona.
I was going to say, it's often races like this where we can take the most learnings from and put that into practice. So what does that look like, debriefing the weekend and inserting those learnings now as we go forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning really from Monaco, even though it's a unique circuit, even though it's a very particular circuit, is in some of the things we tried and that were not successful over the weekend with the car setup and how we were trying to run it, and maybe some of the assumptions we've had about how these cars need to be run and need to be set up. So we've had some useful learning. We've got a chance to apply that straight away in Barcelona. We've also got some more performance developments coming as well, some new aero parts, and then of course, the other factor that comes in is the change of the technical directive 18 for the front wings, which makes tougher flexibility tests on those front wings. Every team will need to make modifications to a certain extent, and what is unknown is not the effect that will have on our car, for example, which we can simulate and we believe we understand well, but what the relative impact of that will be on the field. And so that will be a definite point of intrigue for the media and for everyone watching to see if that does have an impact on relative competitiveness.
With these new regulations with the front wing, it is just 5mm, I think, difference going from 15 to 10mm worth of flex. Can that input such a performance amount out on track?
As I say, it's not the absolute performance amount so much as the relative, and have some teams been gaining more benefit from that than others? We will only see that when we start running on Friday, and really once we get into qualifying and the race on Saturday and Sunday. So it certainly can have an impact, because teams wouldn't be doing it unless it was having a performance positive impact, wouldn't be doing it if it was negative. And I think it's fair to say no team would be choosing to run the wing the way we are having to from Spain unless we have been obliged to do so by technical directives. So we don't know at the moment is the honest answer. We can expect it to make a difference, certainly make the car a little bit more delicate to balance between a happy low speed balance to get around the slow corners and then not being too nervous in the high speed corners. But what the relative impact will be, only the weekend will show.
And you've mentioned the upgrades that we'll be bringing to the Spanish Grand Prix. What are our expectations going into that race with those upgrades?
They're only small upgrades. That's the nature of upgrades when you're in the fourth year of a regulation cycle. You don't find big chunks of tenths of performance. So it's small bits, but small marginal gains that we're able to make in lots of different parts of the car. In terms of expectation, I think it has to be, first of all, just to get ourselves back on a more solid footing after tough weekends in Imola and Monaco, and then really to be up there fighting in the top six in qualifying, and most importantly able to maintain or improve those positions when it comes to the race. We've seen a trend this year. We've seen it in Miami, we've seen it in Jeddah, we saw it also in Imola, where we qualify strongly but then have fallen back relative to the cars we are qualifying around or those just behind us. And that's really the biggest focus of effort, is making sure we have the correct balance of single lap qualifying pace but also strong race pace, because ultimately, as we all know, the points are scored on Sunday and not on Saturday.